The desert wind carried sand and the metallic taste of fear as the SEAL team moved through the rocky terrain of Afghanistan. Lieutenant Marcus Chen led his 6-man unit through what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. The intelligence reports had been clear. No enemy activity in this sector for weeks. But in this unforgiving landscape, routine meant nothing, and clear intelligence often meant someone was about to die. The explosion came without warning. One moment, Petty Officer Jake Morrison was checking his GPS coordinates, and the next, the world erupted in a deafening roar of metal and earth. The IED had been perfectly placed, hidden beneath what looked like natural rock formation. The blast threw Morrison 15 feet into the air before he crashed down hard against the unforgiving ground. Chen's ears rang as he shook off the disorientation. Through the settling dust and debris, he could see Morrison lying motionless, his left leg twisted at an impossible angle. Blood was already seeping through his desert camouflage, creating dark stains that spread rapidly across the fabric. The team medic, Petty Officer Rodriguez, was already moving toward the wounded SEAL, his medical kit in hand. "Contact left," shouted Petty Officer Williams from behind a boulder. Muzzle flashes lit up the distant ridgeline as enemy fighters opened fire. The ambush had been perfectly coordinated. The IED was just the beginning. Now they were pinned down with a critically wounded teammate and no immediate way out. Chen made the call that would haunt him for months afterward. They needed help, and they needed it fast. Morrison was losing blood quickly, and Rodriguez was struggling to stabilize him under fire. The lieutenant grabbed his radio and called for immediate medical evacuation, knowing that in this remote area, it could take precious time they didn't have. But sometimes, help comes from unexpected places. 20 minutes into the firefight, as ammunition ran low and Morrison's condition deteriorated, Chen heard the distinctive sound of rotors approaching. It wasn't the heavy thump of a military helicopter he expected, but something lighter, faster. Through his binoculars, he spotted a civilian medical helicopter, painted in neutral colors, clearly marked with red crosses. "What the hell is a civilian bird doing out here?" Williams asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. This was restricted airspace deep in hostile territory. No civilian aircraft should have been anywhere near their position. But as enemy fire intensified and Morrison's breathing became more labored, Chen didn't care about protocols or explanations. Help was help. The helicopter pilot was either incredibly brave or completely insane. Instead of landing in the relatively safe zone Chen had marked with smoke, the aircraft came down directly in the middle of the firefight. Dust and debris swirled as the rotors whipped up everything loose on the desert floor. The side door slid open, and a figure in medical scrubs jumped out, carrying a field medical kit that looked far more advanced than anything Rodriguez had. What struck Chen immediately was how calm this medic appeared. While bullets whined overhead and explosions echoed off the canyon walls, the newcomer moved with purposeful efficiency toward Morrison. There was no hesitation, no fear in the body language. This person had clearly been under fire before, which made no sense for a civilian medical worker. As the medic knelt beside Morrison and began working, Chen noticed something else unusual. The hands moving over his wounded teammate were smaller, more delicate than he'd expected. When the medic finally looked up to communicate with Rodriguez about Morrison's condition, Chen felt his world shift slightly off its axis. The person who had risked everything to save his teammate was a woman. Not just any woman, but someone whose movements and tactical awareness suggested military training. She worked on Morrison with skills that went far beyond basic emergency medicine, using techniques that Chen recognized from advanced combat medical training. Her eyes constantly scanned the battlefield, tracking threats and calculating risks with the precision of someone who had been taught to fight. The mystery deepened when she spoke to Rodriguez in crisp, professional tones that carried the unmistakable cadence of military communication. "Patient has a compound fracture of the left tibia. Possible internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping fast. We need to get him airborne in the next 5 minutes or we're going to lose him." Her assessment was quick, accurate, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had made these life-or-death decisions many times before. As Chen watched this enigmatic medic work to save Morrison's life, questions flooded his mind. Who was she? How had she known to come to their exact location? Why was a civilian helicopter operating in restricted airspace? And most puzzling of all, Where had a medical worker learned to move like a trained combatant? The way she positioned herself while treating Morrison, the constant awareness of her surroundings, the efficient movements that wasted no motion, everything about her screamed military training. The woman worked on Morrison with surgical precision while chaos erupted around them. Chen watched in amazement as she stabilized his teammate's shattered leg, using techniques he'd only seen performed by the most elite military surgeons. Her hands moved without tremor despite the bullets cutting through the air above their heads. Every few seconds her eyes would dart to the ridgelines, tracking the enemy positions with an awareness that made Chen's tactical instincts buzz with recognition. "Rodriguez, I need you to maintain pressure here while I establish an IV line," she instructed, her voice cutting through the noise of battle with remarkable clarity. "His blood pressure is dropping faster than I can compensate for. We've got maybe 4 minutes before he goes into shock." Rodriguez nodded and followed her instructions without question, despite the fact that she was clearly taking command of the medical situation. There was something in her tone, an authority that came from experience with life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Chen had heard that same tone from field surgeons who had operated in forward combat zones for years. The enemy fire intensified, forcing the team to take cover behind the scattered rocks. The mysterious medic didn't flinch as a round sparked off the stone inches from her head. Instead, she adjusted her position slightly to maintain better cover while continuing her work on Morrison. The movement was so smooth, so automatic, that Chen realized she had made these calculations hundreds of times before. "Who are you?" Chen finally asked during a brief lull in the shooting. The question had been burning in his mind since she'd jumped from that helicopter. "And how did you know we were here?" She glanced up at him briefly, and Chen saw something flicker in her eyes, a momentary vulnerability that she quickly masked. "Sarah Martinez," she replied simply. "I monitor military radio frequencies for medical emergencies. Heard your call for medevac and responded." Her explanation was technically plausible, but Chen's instincts told him there was much more to the story. William suddenly called out from his position. "More movement on the eastern ridge. Looks like they're trying to flank us." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were outnumbered, low on ammunition, and pinned down with a critically wounded teammate. Even with Sarah's medical expertise, Morrison needed surgical facilities that were hours away. Sarah seemed to sense the team's growing desperation. She looked directly at Chen with eyes that held depths of experience that didn't match her apparent age. "Lieutenant, I need you to trust me on something. My helicopter can carry your wounded teammate, but we need to provide cover for the evacuation. I'm guessing you have about 60 rounds left between all of you?" Chen stared at her in shock. Her ammunition assessment was remarkably accurate. They had been counting rounds carefully, and her estimate was within 10% of their actual remaining firepower. No civilian should have been able to make that calculation so precisely. It required understanding not just weapon systems but combat consumption rates and tactical ammunition management. "How could you possibly know that?" Rodriguez asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Sarah didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into her medical kit and pulled out something that made every SEAL freeze in recognition. It was a military-issued tactical radio, the kind used by special operations forces, not the civilian emergency radio she should have been carrying, but sophisticated communication equipment that was restricted to active military personnel. "I'm going to call in some friends," she said quietly, her fingers working the radio controls with practiced efficiency. "Delta 77, this is Phoenix. I need immediate fire support at grid reference." She rattled off their exact coordinates without consulting any maps or GPS devices. Chen realized she had memorized their position while treating Morrison, another skill that spoke of extensive military training. The response came back immediately in crisp military language. "Phoenix, Delta 77 copies. We have eyes on your position. Stand by for danger close fire mission." Chen felt his blood run cold. Whoever Sarah really was, she had just called in air support using call signs that suggested she was part of an active military operation. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, but this time it wasn't helicopters. The distinctive whine of jet engines echoed off the canyon walls as 2 F-16 fighters screamed overhead. Chen watched in amazement as they immediately began engaging the enemy positions on the ridgelines with devastating precision. "Phoenix, this is Delta 77. Hostiles neutralized. You have a clear corridor for evacuation." The radio crackled with professional efficiency that left no doubt about the level of coordination involved. Sarah looked at Chen with an expression that mixed regret with determination. "Lieutenant, I need you to understand something. What happened here today never happened. Your official report will state that military air support responded to your distress call and facilitated your evacuation. No civilian helicopter, no mysterious medic, nothing that would require uncomfortable questions or investigations." The implication hit Chen like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just some civilian good Samaritan who happened to have medical training. She was part of something much larger, something classified enough that her very presence needed to be erased from official records. The level of resources she could command, the instant air support, the sophisticated equipment, it all pointed to a black operations unit that officially didn't exist. As the enemy fire ceased and an eerie quiet settled over the battlefield, Sarah continued working on Morrison with renewed urgency. The temporary reprieve gave her the opportunity to perform more complex medical procedures, and Chen watched in fascination as she worked. Her movements were economical and precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary motions. Everything about her technique spoke of someone who had performed battlefield surgery under extreme conditions many times before. "We need to move him now," Sarah announced, checking Morrison's vitals one final time. "The stabilization will hold for about 30 minutes, but he needs a surgical team after that." She began gathering her equipment with the same methodical efficiency she had shown throughout the crisis. Rodriguez helped her prepare Morrison for transport, and Chen noticed how naturally they worked together despite having just met. Sarah seemed to anticipate Rodriguez's movements, positioning herself to maximize their combined effectiveness. It was the kind of seamless cooperation that usually took months of training to achieve, yet she had established it within minutes. The helicopter pilot had kept the aircraft running during the entire engagement, rotors spinning and ready for immediate departure. As they carried Morrison toward the bird, Chen got his first good look at the pilot through the cockpit window. The man wore civilian clothes, but his posture and the way he scanned the surrounding terrain screamed military training. His hands moved over the controls with the precision of someone who had flown combat missions in hostile territory. "Who's your pilot?" Chen asked Sarah as they loaded Morrison into the helicopter's medical bay. The aircraft's interior was unlike any civilian medical helicopter he had ever seen. The equipment was state-of-the-art, far beyond what most military units had access to. Monitoring devices, surgical tools, and pharmaceutical supplies that represented millions of dollars in advanced medical technology. "Someone who flies where others can't," Sarah replied cryptically. She was checking Morrison's IV lines and adjusting the portable ventilator that was keeping him stable. Her familiarity with the equipment suggested she had used this particular helicopter many times before. This wasn't an emergency response. It was a well-oiled operation with predetermined protocols and procedures. Chen made a decision that would complicate his life for months to come. "I'm coming with you," he announced, climbing into the helicopter despite Sarah's surprised look. "Morrison is my responsibility, and I'm not abandoning him to strangers. No matter how skilled you are," Sarah started to protest. But the pilot's voice came through the intercom system. "We need to leave now. Weather window is closing and we have other commitments." There was an edge to his voice that suggested this operation was running on a tight schedule with no room for delays. As the helicopter lifted off, Chen watched the desert landscape fall away below them. From the air, he could see the full scope of the battle they had just survived. The enemy positions had been completely destroyed by the airstrikes, leaving only smoking craters where the fighters had been hidden. The precision of the attack was remarkable. Every hostile position eliminated while leaving the surrounding area untouched. "Those pilots knew exactly where to hit," Chen observed, looking at Sarah for an explanation. "That kind of targeting requires real-time intelligence and perfect coordination. How did they know the exact enemy positions?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, and Chen saw a flicker of something that might have been respect in her eyes. "You're very observant, Lieutenant. Most people wouldn't have noticed the tactical details." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "The truth is, we've been monitoring this area for several days. Your team walked into an ambush that was intended for someone else." The implications of her statement hit Chen immediately. If Sarah's people had been watching the area, they had known about the enemy presence before his team arrived. The question was why they hadn't warned the SEALs about the danger. Unless Chen realized with growing unease, His team had been allowed to walk into the ambush for reasons he couldn't yet understand. "You used us as bait," he said quietly, the pieces falling into place. "You knew there were hostiles in that area, and you let us walk in there anyway." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Chen saw her jaw tighten slightly. "Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good, Lieutenant. Your mission provided the perfect opportunity to eliminate a high-value target that we've been tracking for months. The enemy commander who organized that ambush was responsible for dozens of attacks on coalition forces." Chen felt a cold anger building in his chest. "So you sacrificed my team to get your target? Morrison nearly died because you needed us to spring your trap?" The betrayal stung more because of how skillfully Sarah had saved Morrison's life. She had risked everything to repair damage that her own operation had caused. "No," Sarah replied firmly, and Chen heard genuine emotion in her voice for the first time. "The original plan didn't involve your team at all. When we realized you were moving into the area, I argued against letting the operation proceed. But my superiors overruled me. That's why I was monitoring your radio frequencies. I knew you might need help." The helicopter banked sharply as they approached what looked like a temporary landing zone in the middle of nowhere. Chen could see several vehicles waiting, along with a full medical team ready to receive Morrison. The level of preparation was impressive, suggesting that Sarah's organization had resources and capabilities that rivaled anything in the official military structure. "This is where we part ways, Lieutenant," Sarah said as the helicopter touched down. "A military medical team will take over Morrison's care from here. He'll receive the best possible treatment, and his recovery will be complete. You have my word on that." Chen wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but Morrison's welfare had to come first. The medical team that took over his care was clearly top-notch, their movements coordinated and professional. As they transferred Morrison to a waiting ambulance, Chen realized that Sarah had been true to her word. His teammate was going to survive and recover fully. As Morrison was wheeled away to the medical facility, Chen found himself alone with Sarah in the landing zone. The other personnel had dispersed quickly, leaving only the two of them standing beside the helicopter in the fading afternoon light. Chen realized this might be his only opportunity to get real answers about what had happened and who Sarah really was. "Before I disappear back into whatever shadow organization you work for," Chen said, "I need to know something. That medical training you demonstrated, where did you learn to perform battlefield surgery like that? And don't tell me you picked it up in civilian medical school." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of memory that Chen recognized from his own experiences with loss and trauma. "I was a Navy doctor for 8 years, served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, mostly with Marine units and forward operating bases." The revelation explained much of what Chen had observed. Navy doctors assigned to Marine units often received combat training that went far beyond normal medical education. They learned to fight as well as heal, because in forward positions, the line between medic and warrior often disappeared entirely. "But that doesn't explain the resources you have access to," Chen pressed. "The air support, the sophisticated equipment, the ability to operate in restricted airspace. What kind of medical organization commands F-16 fighters?" Sarah turned to face him directly, and Chen saw a sadness in her eyes that suggested she was about to share something deeply personal. "After my last tour, I was recruited for a special program. The military had identified a need for medical personnel who could operate independently in hostile territory, providing support for operations that officially don't exist." Chen felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "Black Ops medical support. You're part of a unit that provides healthcare for operations too sensitive for official military involvement." It made sense from a strategic perspective. Covert operations often required medical support that couldn't be traced back to official government agencies. "Something like that," Sarah confirmed. "We operate in the spaces between countries, between conflicts, between the official world and the shadows. When operators need medical support and can't risk exposure through normal channels, we provide an alternative." The implications were staggering. Chen was looking at someone who existed in the same shadow world that spawned conspiracy theories and Hollywood thrillers. But instead of the glamorous spy fiction version, Sarah represented something more prosaic and infinitely more important: the people who kept the Shadow Warriors alive and operational. How many people like you are there? Chen asked, his professional curiosity overriding his anger about being used as bait. How big is this organization? Sarah smiled for the first time since they had met, but it was a sad expression that didn't reach her eyes. Small enough that we all know each other, large enough that we can cover most of the world's hotspots. We're the people who make sure that when someone takes a bullet for national security in a place that doesn't officially exist, they don't die from lack of medical care. A vehicle approached across the desert, kicking up a cloud of dust as it navigated the rough terrain. Chen recognized it as a standard military transport, the kind used for moving personnel in secure areas. Sarah noticed his attention and nodded toward the approaching vehicle. That's your ride back to your base, she explained. The official story is that a routine medevac helicopter responded to your distress call and evacuated your wounded teammate. Military air support provided cover for the extraction. Nothing unusual, nothing that requires special classification or investigation. Chen felt frustrated by the neat way his extraordinary experience was being packaged into a mundane official report. What about you? Do you just disappear back into whatever shadow you came from? Do I ever see you again or learn your real name? Sarah Martinez is my real name, she replied quietly. As for seeing me again, that depends on whether you stay in the kind of operations where our paths might cross. Special operations units occasionally encounter situations where official medical support isn't available or appropriate. When that happens, we're the alternative. The transport vehicle pulled up beside them and Chen could see a familiar face behind the wheel. Sergeant Major Thompson from his unit's administrative section had come to collect him personally. The sight of a known face from his normal world made the entire experience with Sarah feel even more surreal. Lieutenant Chen, Thompson called out, good to see you in one piece. We got word that Morrison is going to make a full recovery. Hell of a thing, that ambush, but the air support really saved your bacon. His casual tone suggested that the official version of events was already being treated as established fact. Sarah extended her hand to Chen in a formal farewell gesture. As he shook it, she pressed something small into his palm. In case you ever need to reach me, she said quietly, her voice low enough that Thompson couldn't hear. But think carefully before you use it. Some doors once opened can't be closed again. Chen looked down at the object in his hand. It was a small device that looked like a modified GPS unit, but he could tell it was actually a sophisticated communication device. The fact that Sarah was entrusting him with a way to contact her organization suggested a level of trust that went beyond their brief encounter. Why? Chen asked simply. Why give me this? Why trust me with knowledge of your operation? Sarah was already walking back toward her helicopter, but she paused to answer his question, because sometimes the official channels fail, and good people die because they can't get the help they need. You've proven you'll risk everything for your people. That's the kind of person we work with. She climbed into the helicopter without looking back, leaving Chen standing in the desert with more questions than answers and a communication device that represented a doorway into a world most people never knew existed. 3 months passed before Chen had reason to think seriously about the communication device Sarah had given him. Morrison had made a complete recovery, exactly as Sarah had promised, and was back on active duty with his unit. The official reports had been filed and accepted without question, and life had returned to what passed for normal in their corner of the military world. But Chen couldn't forget Sarah or the questions her intervention had raised. He found himself researching military medical programs, looking for any trace of the organization she represented. His searches turned up nothing concrete, just hints and references that seemed to point toward something that officially didn't exist. Shadow budgets, classified medical programs, references to unconventional medical support in heavily redacted documents. The opportunity to learn more came during a mission briefing for what should have been a routine intelligence gathering operation in Syria. Chen's team was tasked with infiltrating a remote compound to gather information about weapons smuggling operations. The mission parameters were straightforward, but something about the intelligence briefing bothered Chen. The information was too clean, too convenient, with gaps that suggested important details were being withheld. Sir, Chen asked the briefing officer, what's our extraction plan if things go sideways? The nearest friendly forces are 6 hours away, and this compound is in disputed territory. It was a reasonable question, the kind that experienced operators always asked before accepting dangerous missions. The briefing officer, A major Chen had never worked with before, seemed uncomfortable with the question. Standard protocol, Lieutenant. You have emergency beacon, satellite communication, and priority call for air support if needed. Your mission window gives you plenty of time to complete objectives and extract before any complications arise. Chen's instincts told him there was more to the story. The Major's evasive answer, combined with the unusual intelligence gaps, suggested this mission had complications that weren't being discussed in the official briefing. That night, alone in his quarters, Chen pulled out Sarah's communication device for the first time since receiving it. The device activated with a simple power button, displaying a basic interface that looked deceptively simple. Chen entered a brief message. Need information about current operation in Syrian Sector 7. Potential complications not addressed in official briefing. He hesitated for a moment before sending the message, knowing that reaching out to Sarah's organization represented a significant step into the shadow world she inhabited. The response came within an hour, faster than Chen had expected. Meet at coordinates 34.2467 and 381543E at 0300 hours tomorrow. Come alone. Bring standard field gear. The location was about 30 kilometers from his base, accessible by motorcycle during off-duty hours. Chen realized he was being asked to take a significant risk. Leaving base without authorization to meet with someone from an organization that officially didn't exist. Chen made the decision that would change the trajectory of his military career. At 0230 hours, he slipped out of base using routes he had mapped during previous reconnaissance training. The motorcycle ride through the dark Syrian countryside was nerve-wracking, as the area was known for insurgent activity and random checkpoints. But Chen's curiosity about Sarah's organization and his concerns about the upcoming mission overrode his caution. The coordinates led to an abandoned gas station on a road that had seen better days. Chen arrived to find Sarah waiting for him, dressed in dark civilian clothes and carrying equipment that confirmed his suspicions about her true nature. In the 3 months since their first meeting, she seemed to have aged beyond what time alone could account for. There were new lines around her eyes and a wariness that spoke of recent experiences with violence and loss. You came, Sarah said, and Chen heard genuine surprise in her voice. I wasn't sure you would actually use the communicator. Most people prefer to stay in the official world where everything has proper authorization and clear chains of command. I need to know what I'm walking into tomorrow, Chen replied directly. The mission briefing had too many holes and my instincts are telling me there are complications that weren't discussed. If you have information that could keep my team alive, I need to hear it. Sarah nodded approvingly at his direct approach. Your instincts are correct. The compound you're targeting tomorrow isn't just a weapons smuggling operation. It's a meeting place for representatives from 3 different terrorist organizations who are negotiating a major arms deal. The weapons involved include chemical agents that could kill thousands of people if they reach the wrong hands. The revelation hit Chen like a physical blow. His team was being sent into a situation far more dangerous than they had been told, against multiple hostile forces instead of the single smuggling operation described in their briefing. Why wasn't this included in our mission parameters? We're not equipped or prepared for a multi-faction engagement. Because officially, the United States government can't acknowledge that this meeting is taking place, Sarah explained. The intelligence was gathered through channels that don't exist, using methods that would cause diplomatic incidents if they were revealed. Your mission is designed to look like a routine counter-smuggling operation that happened to stumble onto something bigger. Chen felt the familiar anger rising that he had experienced during their first encounter. Once again, his team was being used as unwitting participants in a larger operation that put them at risk without their knowledge. So we're expendable assets in someone else's game, just like last time. No, Sarah said firmly, and Chen heard the same genuine emotion in her voice that had convinced him of her sincerity before. That's why I'm here. My organization has been tasked with providing unofficial support for your mission. We'll be watching, and if things go wrong, we'll extract your team before the situation becomes hopeless. Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed Chen detailed satellite imagery of the compound his team would be infiltrating. The intelligence was far more comprehensive than anything in his official briefing, showing guard positions, patrol routes, vehicle placements, and structural details that would be crucial for mission success. Chen realized he was looking at real-time surveillance data that had been gathered within the last few hours. The intelligence Sarah provided changed everything about how Chen approached the mission. Armed with real information about the threats they would face, he was able to modify his team's tactics and equipment selection to match the actual situation, rather than the sanitized version from their official briefing. But the knowledge came with a heavy psychological burden. He couldn't share the real intelligence with his team without revealing his contact with Sarah's organization. The mission began exactly as planned, with Chen's team infiltrating the compound during the early morning hours when guard activity was at its lowest point. But as they moved through the facility, Chen could see signs of the larger operation that Sarah had warned him about. Multiple vehicles with different license plates, weapons caches that far exceeded what a simple smuggling operation would require, and communication equipment sophisticated enough to coordinate international criminal activities. Rodriguez noticed the discrepancies immediately. "LT, this doesn't match our intelligence briefing," he whispered as they observed the main building from a concealed position. "There are way more people here than we were told to expect, and they're better armed than smugglers should be." Chen made a decision that went against everything in his military training. "Change of plans," he announced to his team. "We're going to gather intelligence and extract without engaging unless absolutely necessary. Something about this situation doesn't match our briefing, and I want us all to go home tonight." Williams looked confused by the change in mission parameters. "Sir, our orders were to neutralize the smuggling operation and capture any high-value targets. Are we aborting the mission?" "We're adapting to changing circumstances," Chen replied, using military language to cover his real reasoning. Intelligence gathering takes priority over engagement when the tactical situation doesn't match expectations. It was a reasonable decision that any experienced officer might make, but Chen knew his real motivation was the warning Sarah had provided. As they observed the compound, Chen watched the meeting Sarah had described take place. Representatives from 3 different organizations arrived within minutes of each other, their body language and security arrangements confirming that this was a high-level negotiation, rather than a routine criminal transaction. Chen realized he was witnessing the kind of intelligence gathering that would normally require months of planning and multiple intelligence agencies. The meeting lasted exactly 47 minutes, and Chen's team was able to photograph the participants and document the weapons being displayed for negotiation. The chemical agents Sarah had mentioned were clearly visible, military-grade containers that represented a massive threat to civilian populations if they fell into terrorist hands. Chen realized that his team had stumbled onto intelligence that could prevent thousands of deaths, but their position was compromised when Williams accidentally triggered a motion sensor that had been installed since their last surveillance of the area. Alarms began sounding throughout the compound, and Chen watched as the peaceful intelligence-gathering mission transformed into a desperate fight for survival. His team found themselves outnumbered 3-1 against opponents who were better armed and more organized than anyone had expected. "Contact front," Morrison shouted as he engaged targets from behind a concrete barrier. His leg had healed completely from the injuries Sarah had treated, but Chen could see the psychological impact of being in another life-threatening situation so soon after his last near-death experience. "Multiple hostiles moving to flank our position." Chen made the hardest decision of his military career. Instead of following standard protocol and calling for official military support, he activated the emergency beacon that Sarah had given him along with the communicator. He knew that using unofficial resources during an active military operation could end his career, but keeping his team alive was more important than his professional future. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes of Chen's distress signal, the compound was surrounded by helicopter gunships that appeared from multiple directions simultaneously. The precision of their arrival suggested they had been positioned nearby, ready to provide support exactly as Sarah had promised. But instead of immediately attacking, the aircraft used loudspeakers to broadcast surrender demands in multiple languages. "All hostiles in the compound, you are surrounded by coalition forces. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately. This is your only warning." The message was repeated in Arabic, Farsi, and French, covering the languages spoken by the different terrorist organizations present at the meeting. Most of the terrorists chose to fight rather than surrender, leading to a brief but intense battle that demonstrated the overwhelming firepower advantage held by Sarah's organization. The helicopter gunships worked with surgical precision, neutralizing hostile positions while carefully avoiding any risk to Chen's team. It was a level of tactical coordination that Chen had rarely seen, even in major military operations. In less than 20 minutes, the compound was secure, and the surviving terrorists were in custody. Chen watched as Sarah's people efficiently processed the scene, gathering intelligence and evidence while preparing the captured chemical weapons for safe disposal. Their professionalism and organization rivaled anything Chen had seen in official military operations. Sarah appeared beside Chen as he watched the cleanup operation, materializing from the shadows with the same silent efficiency she had demonstrated during their first meeting. "Are you and your team injured?" she asked, conducting a quick visual assessment of each SEAL while speaking. "We're all fine," Chen replied, "but I need to know what happens now. How do we explain this in our mission report? How do I account for the support we received?" The practical implications of accepting help from an unofficial organization were beginning to sink in, and Chen realized he had created a complex situation with no easy solutions. Sarah's expression was understanding but firm. "Your mission report will state that you discovered a larger operation than expected and called for emergency support. Coalition air assets responded to your distress call and provided assistance in neutralizing the threat. The chemical weapons will be credited to your intelligence gathering, and your team will receive commendations for preventing a major terrorist attack." Chen felt the familiar frustration with the way his experiences were being rewritten to fit official narratives. "And what about the truth? What about accountability for sending us into a situation we weren't prepared for?" He was tired of being a pawn in games he didn't understand, even when the outcomes were positive. Sarah looked at Chen with an expression that mixed sympathy with resignation, as if she had anticipated his frustration and shared it to some degree. "The truth is complicated, Marcus. May I call you Marcus?" When he nodded, she continued, "The truth is that sometimes preventing disasters requires operating in spaces where traditional military and intelligence structures can't function effectively." Chen found himself wrestling with questions that went far beyond military tactics or mission parameters. How do you live with it, knowing that you're part of a system that treats people like expendable pieces on a chessboard? How do you justify the manipulation and secrecy? "By counting the lives we save," Sarah replied simply. "Tonight, your team prevented chemical weapons from reaching terrorist organizations that would have used them to kill thousands of innocent people. Yes, you were placed at risk without full knowledge of the situation, but if we had gone through official channels, the bureaucracy and political considerations would have delayed action until it was too late. The cleanup operation around them was winding down with remarkable efficiency." Chen watched as the last of the captured terrorists were loaded into unmarked vehicles, while the chemical weapons were secured in specialized containers for transport to disposal facilities. Within an hour, the compound would look like the site of a routine military operation, rather than the complex international incident it had actually been. "I have a proposition for you," Sarah said, drawing Chen's attention back to their conversation. "My organization is always looking for people with your skills and moral compass. You've proven twice now that you'll risk everything for your people, and you have the tactical expertise we need for operations like this one." Chen felt a chill of recognition. This was the recruitment pitch he had sensed was coming since their first meeting. Sarah's organization didn't just provide medical support for black operations. They recruited active military personnel to expand their capabilities. "You want me to join your shadow organization, to disappear from the official military and operate in the spaces between countries and conflicts. I want you to consider expanding your definition of service," Sarah corrected. "You would still be serving your country, but in ways that official military structures can't accommodate. The threats we face today don't respect national boundaries or diplomatic protocols. Sometimes protecting innocent lives requires operating outside the systems that were designed for conventional warfare." The offer was tempting, in ways that surprised Chen. The frustration of being used as an unwitting pawn in larger games, the restrictions of official military bureaucracy, the knowledge that important missions were sometimes compromised by political considerations. All of these factors made Sarah's organization seem like an attractive alternative. But Chen also recognized the costs of accepting her offer. "What about my team? What about the relationships and responsibilities I have in the official military?" Do I just abandon everyone who depends on me to chase shadows in the intelligence community? Sarah's response revealed the depth of planning that had gone into her recruitment approach. Your team would benefit from having someone with connections to our organization. We don't ask people to completely sever their official ties. We ask them to expand their capabilities and options. You would continue your regular military duties while occasionally providing support for operations like tonight's mission. Chen realized he was being offered a double life, serving simultaneously in the official military and in Sarah's shadow organization. The complexity and potential dangers of such an arrangement were staggering, but so were the opportunities to make a real difference in preventing disasters like the chemical weapons attack they had just stopped. I need time to think about this, Chen said finally. This isn't the kind of decision you make in the field after a firefight. There are too many implications, too many people who would be affected by my choice. Sarah nodded as if she had expected his response. Take all the time you need. The offer will remain open, and you have the communicator if you decide you want to know more about what we do. She paused, looking out at the dawn sky that was beginning to lighten over the Syrian desert. But don't take too long. The world is getting more dangerous, and good people are dying because the official systems can't adapt fast enough to address new threats. As Chen's team prepared for extraction by official military helicopter, he found himself looking at his career and his life from a completely different perspective. Sarah had shown him a world where dedicated professionals worked outside official structures to address threats that traditional military and intelligence agencies couldn't handle effectively. It was a world of moral ambiguity and personal risk, but also one where individual actions could prevent massive tragedies. The helicopter ride back to base gave Chen time to process everything that had happened. His team was safe, a major terrorist attack had been prevented, and he had been offered an opportunity to expand his service beyond the constraints of traditional military structures. But he also knew that accepting Sarah's offer would fundamentally change who he was and how he understood his obligations to his country and his fellow warriors. Morrison, who'd been unusually quiet during the extraction, finally spoke as they approached their base. LT, I don't know what kind of connections you have, but that support we received tonight was something special. Whoever those people were, they saved our lives and probably a lot of other lives too. Chen looked at his teammate, realizing that Morrison had intuited something about the unofficial nature of their support, without understanding the full implications. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places, Chen replied, echoing something Sarah had told him months earlier. The important thing is that we all came home tonight. As the helicopter touched down and Chen prepared to write yet another carefully edited mission report, he fingered the communicator in his pocket and wondered whether he was ready to step fully into the shadow world that Sarah represented. The decision would define not just his future, but his understanding of what it truly meant to serve his country in an increasingly complex and dangerous world.